There are loves that leave quietly. No slamming doors, no dramatic ultimatums. Just a slow, tired drifting apart, like two boats that once rested side by side, gradually pulled in opposite directions by a tide neither of them had the strength to fight. That was what happened between Thelma and J1. They had found each other during a season of impossible odds. Thelma had been on a semester abroad in Seoul, a black woman from Atlanta with long, wild curly hair that drew second glances wherever she walked. Not because she did not belong, but because she carried herself as though she owned whatever room she entered. She had a laugh that could silence a street and eyes that held entire conversations before she ever parted her lips. J1 was the kind of man who made people forget what they had been about to say. Tall and quietly magnetic, with a single tattoo curling along the left side of his neck. A dark brushstroke of ink that his father had disapproved of and his mother had secretly admired. He came from old, established wealth, the kind that did not announce itself. He wore it the way most people wear their own skin, naturally, without thinking. They fell into each other the way people do when they are both a little lost and the universe decides to be kind for exactly one evening. A coffee shop near Hongdae. A borrowed umbrella. A missed train. By the time that first night ended, neither of them wanted to leave. For years followed. For years of late-night calls stretched across time zones. Of plane tickets bought on impulse. Of learning how to love someone whose world looked nothing like your own. They were good at it for a while. Thelma would save his voice notes and play them on mornings when Seoul felt too far away. Jaewon kept a photograph of her in his wallet. The one where her head was thrown back mid-laugh, curls cascading like a crown around her face. But life has a way of narrowing the space between two hearts without asking permission. Thelma's small catering operation had quietly become something much larger. What began as a passion project, lovingly packaged meals made by hand, grew into something that demanded everything she had. Early mornings, late nights, weekends swallowed whole. She opened a pizza shop on Magnolia Street and poured herself into it completely. The smell of dough rising at 5 in the morning, the rhythm of a busy kitchen, the quiet pride of building something from nothing that people return to again and again. J1's world had accelerated in its own direction. Board meetings in Tokyo, investment summits in Dubai, a life that moved at the speed of a private jet. The calls became shorter. The time zones became excuses. Neither of them was the villain in this story. They were simply two driven people who had loved each other genuinely and then, slowly and without meaning to, let the distance win. By the time the calls stopped entirely, they had already been strangers for months. 2 years passed. 2 years of telling themselves they had moved on. 2 years of filling the silence with work, with new cities, with the comfortable lie that they were perfectly fine. The evening J1 arrived back in Atlanta was unremarkable in every way that mattered. He had flown in for a business associate's private dinner, a 3-day obligation he had already begun mentally shortening. He checked into his suite on Peachtree Street, answered emails until his luggage arrived, and by 7:30 in the evening realized he had not eaten since the business lounge at Incheon Airport. His assistant had flagged a pizza place nearby. A neighborhood favorite, she called it. A local gem. He had ordered without thinking much about it. The hunger had dulled his usual precision. The pizza arrived 40 minutes later. J1 opened the box. The crust was pale in a way that suggested it had never properly met an oven. The cheese had congealed into something that could only be described as ambitious. The tomato sauce had dried at the edges into a thin, defeated film. He stared at it. He closed the box. He opened it again just to confirm what he had seen. It was, without any question, the worst pizza he had encountered in his life, and J1 had eaten pizza in 12 countries across 3 continents. He was not, by nature, a man who made scenes. He had been raised to handle problems quietly, efficiently, without public theater. But something about this particular evening pressed on a nerve he had not known was exposed. The jet lag, the loneliness of a hotel room in a city that had once felt full of possibility. The pale, sorrowful pizza sitting open in its box like a personal affront. He changed into something more casual and called a car. Someone was going to hear about this pizza. Thelma's Pizza and More had been officially closed for 15 minutes when the headlights appeared outside. Thelma was in the back office going over the week's invoices when she heard the front door handle rattle. She looked up. Dee, her restaurant manager, was still at the counter totaling receipts, and Marcus, her youngest staff member, was mopping near the window. All three of them heard it at the same time. Then came the knocking. Firm, patient, the kind that was not going away. Marcus leaned the mop against the wall and went to the door. Through the glass he could see a tall man in a dark jacket standing outside. He cracked the door open. The man outside looked at him calmly. Marcus came back to the office doorway looking like someone who had been assigned a task he had not agreed to. A beat of silence. Thelma set down her pen. She had been on her feet since 5 that morning. She had managed 2 kitchen emergencies, a last-minute catering pickup, and a supplier who had delivered the wrong cheese for the 3rd time this month. Her back ached. There was still flour on her collar from the afternoon rush. She was tired in the way that runs through your bones and not just your body. But she had built this business on one simple belief. If something left her kitchen that was not right, she would own it. Every single time. She pushed back her chair and stood up. She said, more to herself than to Marcus. She walked through the kitchen, through the dim dining area still holding the warm smell of garlic and baked dough, and pulled the front door open. The evening air came in first. Then the light from the street lamp fell across the face of the man standing just outside. Thelma's hand tightened on the door frame. The words she had been about to say simply stopped. They did not come out wrong. They did not come out quietly. They did not come out at all. They simply stopped somewhere between her mind and her mouth, and the whole world seemed to go still with them. She knew that jaw. She knew that stillness. She knew the ink curling along the left side of his neck as well as she knew her own handwriting. J1 had also gone very still. He had spent the ride over rehearsing something calm and measured about quality standards and customer experience. Every word of it was gone now. He was looking at a woman he had not seen in 2 years, and she was looking at him the same way. Like the world had just rearranged itself without warning and neither of them had been told it was going to happen. Her curls were half pinned, half free, spilling around her face the way they always did by the end of a long day. There was flour on her collar. She was holding the door with one hand and staring at him with the particular expression of someone who has just been surprised by something they thought they had already made peace with. He thought she was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 2 years. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The Atlanta night moved around them. A car passing somewhere down the road, the low hum of a streetlight, the warm, thick air of early summer pressing gently between them. He said. Her name came out low and careful, like something he had been carrying for a while and was only now setting down. She said. His name felt strange in her mouth, like a word from a language she used to speak fluently. He looked past her, just briefly, at the shop behind her, at the signage above the door, at the counter and the low lights inside. He said it simply, without surprise. It was not quite a question. Thelma said. She let a moment pass. Then, because she was still herself, so, you are the one who called about the pizza. Something shifted in his expression. Not embarrassment exactly, but something close to it, and under it, the beginning of something that looked almost like a smile. She breathed out slowly through her nose. She said, new cook, wrong oven time. I have already handled it. I would have refunded you if you had called the number on the website. She looked at him directly, the way she always had. Thelma had never been a woman who looked away from things. He held her gaze. 2 years of unanswered calls and faded voice notes and a photograph still in his wallet were sitting in the air between them, and both of them knew it. He said quietly, "But I could not leave." Thelma was quiet for a moment. She looked at him the way she used to look at a recipe she was deciding whether to trust. Long enough to see past the surface. Long enough to make up her mind. Then she stepped back and pulled the door open wider. She said, "I will put the kettle on." Dee saw everything in about 4 seconds. She set 2 mugs on the counter without being asked, pointed Marcus toward his jacket and the exit with one efficient look, and disappeared into the back office, pulling the door almost but not quite shut, enough to give them privacy, not enough to miss anything important. Thelma did not comment on this. She poured the tea and carried both mugs to the small corner table by the window, the one she kept for herself on slow afternoons. There was flour on its surface. She did not wipe it away. Jae-won sat across from her. He looked at the mug. He looked at her. He seemed, for a moment, like a man who had prepared many things to say and was now finding none of them quite fit. He asked, glancing around the shop. She said, 18 months ago. Before that I was doing catering out of my apartment kitchen. He said, and the words were so simple and so direct that she had to look down at her mug for a second. A silence settled between them, not an uncomfortable one, the kind that has weight to it because the people sharing it have history, and history takes up space. Thelma asked. She had not planned to say it that plainly, but she had always been someone who went straight to the thing. Jae-won turned the mug between his hands. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might answer carefully, the way he sometimes used to. Instead he was honest. She nodded slowly, because that was true, and they were both old enough now to stop dressing the truth up in softer clothes. She said, more than once. Undefined. Undefined. He said, I felt the same thing. They sat with that for a moment. The streetlight outside made the flour on the table surface glow faintly. Somewhere outside a car rolled slowly past. Jae-won said, for my part in it. She said, for mine. It was not a grand speech. It was not enough to undo 2 years. But it was true, and between the two of them, truth had always mattered more than theater. She asked, for now. She noticed those 2 words and set them aside without touching them. She said, because she needed the conversation to breathe for a moment. He looked at her, and then he laughed. The real one. The kind that had made her fall for him in the first place. In a coffee shop in Hongdae with rain on the glass and a borrowed umbrella between them. She pressed her lips together against a smile. Losing the battle. She said, I will make you one myself. Then you can tell me what good pizza tastes like. He looked at her across the table, in the warm low light of a pizza shop that smelled of oregano and something older and quieter than either of them could name. He arrived at 11:58. Thelma noticed because she had been watching the clock from the kitchen without admitting to herself that she was watching the clock. She had been in since 7. She had remade the dough twice, once because the first batch was genuinely off, once because she wanted it to be right. Dee had noticed both batches but said nothing, which was its own kind of comment. When Jae-won pushed open the door, the lunchtime crowd was already moving through the shop. He stood in the entrance for a moment, reading the room. The chalkboard menu on the wall, the warm chaos of a busy kitchen service, the red and cream tile that Thelma had chosen herself after 3 weekends of looking at samples. Dee spotted him before Thelma did. She said pleasantly, pointing him through the room. She knows you are here. He sat down. He waited. He did not take out his phone. Thelma came out of the kitchen 15 minutes later carrying a pizza on a wooden board. She had made it thin crust, the way she knew he had always liked. Slow roasted tomato, fresh basil, a little more cheese than the recipe called for, because she remembered that about him too, even though she had not meant to. She set it on the table and stood back with her arms folded, watching him. He picked up a slice, took a bite, said nothing for a long moment. She unfolded her arms. She said simply and went back to her kitchen. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He tried the rosemary chicken pizza on day 2 and told her she could charge twice as much for it. She told him to mind his business. He smiled and ordered another slice. They fell into something that neither of them had a name for yet. Not the old relationship, they were both too careful for that and too honest. But not just two strangers sharing meals either. Something in between. Something new that had roots in something old. He asked her questions. Real ones, not small talk. He asked how she had handled the first year when the money was thin. He asked which dish she was most proud of inventing. He asked what she wanted the shop to be in 5 years. She answered all of them, and she asked him questions too. About soul, about what had changed, about whether the life he was living was actually the life he wanted, or just the one he had built momentum toward. That last question stopped him mid-bite. He said, "I missed it actually." On the third day, J1 arrived at noon as usual and found a closed sign on the door. He stood on the pavement outside for a moment, mildly confused, and called her number. It rang twice, she said, and hung up. He found the side entrance propped open with a brick. Inside, the kitchen was running but the dining room was empty and quiet. Thelma was at the far prep table working dough with both hands and talking over her shoulder to Dee, who was on a stool going through what appeared to be a stack of supplier invoices. It looked like an ordinary workday except that the front of the shop was closed. He asked. Thelma glanced at him without stopping what she was doing. He sat on the stool near the window. He watched her work. He had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully understood, what she looked like in her own element. She moved through the kitchen with the particular authority of someone who knew every inch of a space they had built with intention. She called out to her staff without raising her voice. She tasted things and adjusted without hesitation. She caught a mistake in one of the sauce portions before it left the prep station, corrected it in 10 seconds, and moved on without drama. She was, he thought, extraordinary. And she had been this all along, even during the years when they were drifting apart. She had been building this quietly in the background, while their calls got shorter and the time zones became walls. That sat heavily with him for a while. An hour passed. Dee disappeared into the office. The kitchen staff cycled through their tasks. Thelma came around the prep table and poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of him without ceremony. He looked at her. She was quiet for a moment. She picked up her glass. She said, "That is what we already agreed." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Dee, choosing that exact moment to reappear from the office, took one look at the two of them, turned around and went back. Thelma said carefully, "When do you go back?" "Tomorrow evening." "One day." She looked down at the glass in her hand. She said at last, "I will make you one more pizza." It was not the answer to what he had said. Both of them knew that. But she needed time and he understood it, and so he let it be. He came back that evening after his meetings, as the dinner service was winding down. The shop was quieter by 8. A few tables still occupied. The kitchen pulling the last orders. Thelma was out front for once, talking to a regular customer near the door, when J1 walked in. She saw him immediately. He was wearing the dark jacket again, the good one, and he had his carry-on bag over one shoulder. She wrapped up her conversation, told Dee she was taking her break, and led him to the corner table. His usual one, she had started thinking of it that way without meaning to. They did not pretend the evening was ordinary. He set his hands flat on the table. Thelma looked at him. She had known this conversation was coming. She had been having it with herself for 3 days. She said. He looked at her. He said. We did not. She took a breath. She said. This shop is mine and I am proud of it and I am not walking away from it. But I also know how to use a phone. And so do you. And this time I think we both know what it costs to not use it. He was quiet for a moment. He said. Properly. With the phone calls. She said. And maybe a plane ticket now and then, when it is possible. He said. If Atlanta is on the table. He laughed. She let herself smile properly this time. It was not a fairy tale declaration. It was something better than that. It was two grown people looking at something they had once let slip away, choosing honestly and without pretending it would be easy, to hold on a little tighter this time. Thelma reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Just for a moment. Then she stood up. He watched her go back to the kitchen. He sat in the corner booth on Magnolia Street and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that the distance between himself and something that mattered was actually getting smaller. 3 weeks after J1 flew back to Seoul, Thelma's phone lit up at 11 p.m. with a photo. It was a pizza. A pale, flat, deeply unhappy-looking pizza on a white room service plate. Below it, a single message. There is not a single decent pizza in all of Seoul. I am devastated. Please advise. Thelma sat up in bed and laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. She typed back, "That is what you get for leaving Atlanta." He replied within 30 seconds, "I am already looking at flights." He came back 6 weeks later. Not for an obligation this time. Just for her. He landed on a Friday evening and took a car directly to Magnolia Street, where the dinner service was still running and the shop smelled of garlic and warm bread. Thelma was behind the counter when he walked in. She saw him through the service window before he saw her, and she took exactly 2 seconds to feel the thing she had been carrying quietly for weeks. Relief, warmth, something fuller than either of those, before she straightened up, came around the counter and said, "Undefined." He said, "I think that counts as on time." She studied his face for a moment. He looked tired from the journey. He also looked like someone who had done exactly what he meant to do and was at peace with it. She stepped forward and hugged him. It was the first time they had touched properly since the night she opened the door and found him standing on the other side of it. He put both arms around her and held on, and for a moment the shop and the staff and the smell of oregano in the air all fell away and there was just this. Two people who had wasted 2 years and were determined not to waste any more. She asked, her voice quiet against his shoulder. He said. She pulled back and looked at him. Then she took his bag, slung it over her own shoulder, and nodded toward the kitchen. That night, after the last customer had gone and Dee and Marcus had locked up and said their pointed and cheerful goodnights, Thelma and J1 sat at the corner table long after the kitchen had gone dark. They talked about the practical things, about what it would look like to try again across 12 time zones, about visit schedules and time differences and whether the shop could eventually expand to a second location, and whether Seoul was somewhere she might want to spend more time, not to follow him but because she was curious about it, about the city that had once been where they started. They did not solve everything that night. They were not supposed to, but they mapped the shape of the thing they were building, and neither of them looked away from the difficult parts. They had both learned, at some cost, what looking away led to. At some point after midnight, J1 reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set something on the table between them. It was the photograph, the one from his wallet. Her head thrown back, mid-laugh, curls everywhere. He said simply. Thelma looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at him. She shook her head slowly. But she was smiling, the real one, the one she did not hand out easily. He said, "I am calling now." She reached across the table and picked up the photograph. She looked at the girl in it. Younger, easier, not yet someone who had built something or lost something or chosen to try again with both eyes open. Then she set it down gently in the middle of the table, between their two empty mugs, and left it there. Let it be what it was. A beginning they had not known was a beginning. A starting place, not an ending. Some things end. Some things pause. The difference is whether two people are honest enough with themselves to know which is which, and brave enough to do something about it. Thelma opened her second location 11 months later. In Seoul. It was small. It smelled of slow-roasted tomato and fresh basil, and the particular magic of dough made by someone who genuinely loves what they do. On the opening night, Jae-won sat at the corner table. There was always a corner table in every version of this story, and ate 3 slices without speaking. Then he looked up at her across the room. She was talking to a customer, laughing at something, curls pinned back and hands moving as she spoke, entirely in her element, entirely herself. He thought, "I am the luckiest man who ever complained about a pizza." The photograph from his wallet was framed on the wall of the new shop. Thelma had put it there herself. Beneath it, in small handwritten letters on a piece of card, she had written, "Thank you for watching. Kindly like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. Thank you.